Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar about the general principles for coding of medication errors and other types of deviations from the labeled medicinal product use. I want to thank you all for taking the time to sign up for this class today. This class, unlike the MedDRA coding basics and advanced MedDRA coding, will focus primarily on the medication error side of coding. Medication errors can be found in both the clinical and safety databases and can occur at any time, so it's important to understand the concepts associated with them. The webinar should last today around 90 minutes to the full 2 hours, and then we'll leave a little room for questions and an attempt to keep this class as interactive as possible. I will be taking questions throughout the webinar today, so please feel free to ask a question, as Sarah mentioned, via the questions panel, and it's usually found in the upper right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar screen. As I said, I will be working with Sarah today. She will be monitoring the questions and ensuring everything goes well from a technical perspective. So I just want to take a moment and say thank you, Sarah, for all of your help today. She has also given everyone temporary access to the browser for those that do not have access to their own browsers. The information can be found in the chat area, as she mentioned earlier. So please be sure to log in before we begin, as it will help to make the class more fun and interactive, and you could follow along and practice while you go through the information. I always find it helps to follow along using the browser to kind of help me remember things after the class is done. So there's typically a lot of information given, so it helps to have ways to trigger your memory, at least for me anyway. And this, as Sarah mentioned, this webinar will be recorded, and as long as the quality is good, it will be available on our YouTube channel. So also with reference to the browser, we will be doing a couple exercises a little bit later on in the webinar, and it will definitely be helpful for you to be logged into the browser, and you can do some searching on your own and try to come up with the correct responses. So please be sure to do that. Okay, so with all that being said, let me introduce myself. My name is Nicole Fornerato, and I'm a clinical associate with the MSSO. I'm based in Northern New Jersey in the New York City metropolitan area. And I always, when I start a webinar, I like to give a little weather report. I don't know why, it's just my thing that I like to do. So today I'm coming to you from a little bit of a hazy and pretty cool summer day here in the New York City area. So a nice day though. I joined the MSSO about 2 years ago, but before that, I, like all of you, was a MedDRA user. So I worked in both clinical and safety or post-marketing environment using MedDRA in a variety of different roles. So I was once in your shoes, trying to navigate the medical coding world and medication errors and things like that. So hopefully today I could take you on a fun journey to learn some more about medication errors. So with that being said, let's get started. So I always have to begin with a more general slide that we always show, just to let you know that the ICH adopted the development of MedDRA in the mid-90s and became the owner of the terminology. ICH then appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training and administer the MedDRA licenses. All of these MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee. So ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA, but also owns the training material. It's protected worldwide. You may use the slides within this presentation with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but you will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. And if this presentation is used and any changes take place, like you change any of the material, they must be clearly identified, and any impression that the ICH has endorsed these changes must be avoided. Okay, so during today's webinar, we will cover a variety of topics, including the regulatory background for medication errors. We will then discuss definitions and terminologies for product use concepts based on the ICH guidance documents. After that, we will look into the general principles for coding of medication errors. Then we will apply these principles in exercises, as I mentioned, using the MedDRA browser. So please be sure, like I mentioned, to get yourself logged into that browser if you don't already have access. And finally, we will conclude with a question and answer session. And like I mentioned, I like to take questions throughout, so I'll be pausing at certain instances to see if there are any questions. Okay, so as Sarah mentioned, and I also mentioned, today we will be using Poll Everywhere as our tool, which will help us be interactive. since we are on a webinar today, it's the next best thing to being in person, right? It's a way where you can voice your opinion in an anonymous manner in a free text format. That's important to note that everything we do today in this Poll Everywhere tool is anonymous. I have no idea who's writing what, who's answering what, who's in there, who's not. So just feel free to give it your best shot while we go through these exercises or these polls today. So what you will do to log in is go to www.pollev.com/NicoleF. You can, once you get there, you can click skip. You do not have to put a username in into the browser. So you can just go there. I'll give everyone a second. And as I mentioned, everything is anonymous. And I will also, right now, I'll pull up the QR code. I think everyone's familiar with the QR code. But if you are not, this is an alternate way to kind of log into Poll Everywhere. You just open up your smartphone, put it on camera mode, and kind of put the camera up to that. You will get a link that will pop up. You can click on that link and then, follow the instructions as on this slide. Just click skip, and then you will be able to respond to the activities. So I'll give everyone a couple seconds just to get logged in before we begin. Make sure, and here's the QR code again in case anybody will like it, to use it that way. And the QR code, I guess, if you're using it, you will be in the Poll Everywhere on your phone. If you prefer, you can just log in like I mentioned on this slide, and then you can have Poll Everywhere on your laptop or whatever, you're on your computer in general. Okay, so it looks like people are starting to get in. So this today is my favorite poll of the entire class. It always is. I always like to see where is everyone located. So let's see, it looks like a lot of people are all over. So we have a lot of people up in Canada, some on the East Coast of the United States, someone very far up there in Canada. Very nice. We have people in Europe, looks like India, lots of people in India. Oh, someone was out there in the ocean, but the dot got removed. We have lots of representation, so this is great. South America, very good. I'll give everyone a couple seconds, and it looks like this is working, so that also makes me very happy. So I'll give everyone a little time, just get familiar with the tool, let me know where you are, and then we'll move on to the next question. The next poll, I should say. All right, very good. Lots, some on the East Coast. Yeah, we got representation from all over. Very nice. The dots keep moving. All right, so it looks like everyone's in, so I will move to the next poll just in the interest of time because we have a lot of material to cover today. So I just would like to know, what role do you perform? And this also gives you an opportunity to practice the Poll Everywhere typing in a free form response. So I just like to see what my audience is made of. Medical coder, very good. Okay, give everyone a couple seconds to respond. Medical reviewer, very nice. Oh, local farm PV member at a local hospital. Okay, safety physician. Vendor, heavy on the drug safety side, I see it, the pharmacovigilance side, which I guess is expected. Although, as I mentioned, it does cover both clinical and safety. Medical safety reviewer, lots of physicians on the line today, very nice. Give a couple more seconds for everyone to get their responses in. More medical coders. Monitor, very good. Here we go, so clinical data management. Regulator. Okay, trainee. I always love to see what roles everyone, see what kind of a broad audience. As you can see, we always get lots of people from all over, which is very nice. And then as well as lots of people performing lots of different roles, which is also very nice. Keeps the audience, very diverse, very good. All right, great. So with that, we will get started. So with logistics out of the way, we know Poll Everywhere is working. Let's get started. So we will first today look into the regulatory background because this is an important topic and that is of interest to many regulatory authorities around the world. So an example of this is in the US, it is estimated that about approximately 7,000 to 9,000 deaths occur each year due to a medication error. So the most common reasons for errors include failure to communicate drug orders, illegible handwriting, wrong drug selection chosen from a drop-down menu, maybe confusion over similarly named drugs, confusion over similar packaging between products, or errors involving dosing units or weights. So medication errors may be due to human errors, but is often a result from a flawed system with inadequate backup to detect mistakes. So as you could see from just the examples I gave, there's lots of reasons why medication errors can occur. Okay, so medication errors are critical, an important problem in healthcare, and they are not only of great importance for the patients concerned, but also have huge impact on healthcare costs. So they represent the most frequent preventable reason for adverse events in the use of medicinal products. And since they are actually preventable, they are in focus of the regulatory authorities. So depending on countries and regions, they support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and causes of medication errors. So in order to develop improved strategies for their prevention to protect patient safety, but also to reduce healthcare costs. So because the costs are associated with medication errors could be much better used in other areas of the healthcare system. So the fact that medication errors are in the focus of the regulatory authorities is also reflected by new guidelines that have been published or are in preparation to be published. So one example of a guidance that has been produced is one that you may already be familiar with, the Good Practice Guide on Recording, Coding, Reporting, and Assessing Medication Errors of the EMA, or European Medicines Agency. So as you can see here, there's also a link down at the bottom that you will have in your slide deck, so you can reference it if need be. And then there's all links embedded in here. And this is to show you that the FDA has also published various guidance documents to help avoid medication errors. And you can see some of these examples here as shown, and we have links to them. So you can, and there's a link at the bottom where you can find this information actually. And as stated earlier, regulatory requirements may differ between regions. So please make yourself familiar with your local requirements. That's very important because it does, requirements do change from region to region. So as we saw in the last slide, there have been lots of regulatory initiatives around medication errors. So these initiatives led to an adaptation of MedDRA. So this adaptation consists of new terms being added, as well as the restructuring of the hierarchy to better support specific coding. And of course, after coding is complete, the data retrieval and analysis of that data. So medication errors and product use issues, right? So again, the coding, most important piece, but once that's done, it also, there's guidance also to support the data retrieval and analysis. So the modifications to MedDRA also led to modifications to the PTC, or the Points to Consider document. It was modified to include more guidance around these coding scenarios. So this topic is not only relevant to the post-marketing sector, but like I mentioned, it's also very important for clinical development, including clinical trials. So an example of this is in May of 2022, the FDA and the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA convened a virtual public meeting on the potential medication error risks with investigational drug container labels. The risk of medication errors related to the content and format of information on investigational drug container labels was explored. The prevalence and nature of medication errors and the practices that might minimize the potential for such errors. So the recorded event is still available on the web if you are interested. So you can Google that and kind of find it if you want to get more information around it. So before we move on to the next topic, I'm just going to take a brief pause just to make sure there are no immediate questions.
We have none at this time.
Perfect, thank you. So as mentioned already, the PTC documents have been updated and supplemented to provide more guidance and assistance to MedDRA users on this topic. So this slide is a visual representation of the PTC document. So as mentioned quite a bit, I always mention this, and if any of you have ever taken a webinar I had in the past, I like to mention this quite a bit in other classes, but it's a good idea to become very familiar with this document and its contents. And as you can see, it keeps coming up over and over again if you have taken a webinar, another webinar with me or any of my colleagues in the past. Very, very important document. So this slide is just taking a closer look into this document from a medication errors or product use issues perspective. So you will see there is not much guidance around these topics. There is some, but it's a little bit limited, right? You know, I think there's quite a bit, but it's just a little bit limited. So this slide is just to show you that while the PTC, it's a great document when it comes to medication errors and product use issues, it's important to note, right, that there's another document available that provides more detailed information, examples, and guidance. So unlike the points to consider document, the companion document, which is the one you see here, it's not updated every year, but instead it's updated as needed, even though it's a living document. So it was last updated to version 2.0 in October of 2020, as shown in the screenshot. So in the companion document, you will find much more detailed explanations around medication errors and product use issues. So although we will go into detail around some of these topics today, actually most of these topics today, I would highly recommend taking a closer look again at this document. It's really worth the time, you know, when we're all so busy, but it really is helpful to take the time to read through it to help better understand the terminology and classification of such events with many practical examples. So with that being said, I am actually going to show you how to access the document really, really quickly because we do have a lot of information to cover today. So what you do is go to MedDRA.org and it'll take you to our homepage. And here you will see there is a PTC logo right in the upper right-hand corner. You can click on that and you will see a bunch of documents do pop up. And there you will see we have the MedDRA term selection points to consider our PTC document. And we also have a companion document. It's in PDF and Word format for all of these documents. And you can feel free to download them. You don't need a username. You don't need a password. You can download them on your own time, save them to your desktop or wherever you like to save them, and you know, reference them as needed, and you know, take the time maybe hopefully to read through them as well. So that's just to show you where you can find them. Okay, so before we go into further details, we have to familiarize ourselves with the terms that refer to medication errors and other product use errors and issues. So we will start with the definition of a medication error. A medication error is any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient, right? While the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or even their families, right? The second aspect that is highlighted in green is important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process. So when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers. In other words, outside the control of the HCP or healthcare provider, or the patient or consumer. So medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the product themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, labeling, packaging, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution, and administration, as well as the related education and project monitoring. So it covers a lot. So this slide basically serves as a visual representation from page 31 of the PTC document that facilitates the classifications of product use errors and problems. And we will get into this, you know, we'll go through this chart quite a bit today and ask ourselves some questions as we go along to see where things fall, etc. But 3 criteria are used for this purpose. So was the deviation intentional, a conscious decision, or did it happen in error? Was it unintentional? Who caused the event, meaning who triggered it, right? The patient or the consumer or a healthcare professional? And did it happen in the context of the therapeutic use of the product? Yes or no, right? So here we have, you can see here in a misuse, was an intentional misuse? Yes, considered intentional. By whom? It could be by the patient or the consumer, right? And then we have a yes here for therapeutic, for therapeutic use with a star, right? So that is starred because definitions of misuse may not always include the concept of therapeutic use. So misuse may be similar to the concept of abuse in some regions, like for example, in German-speaking countries. So that's why there's a little star there, just to let you know. And then you could go down the chart and read it. Like here we have off-label use, was an intentional yes by a HCP or healthcare professional. Was it for therapeutic use? Yes. Whereas abuse and addiction are not considered for therapeutic use. And then we give you the sections in the PTC where you can locate this information if you would like more. So let me illustrate these scenarios with some practical examples. So here we have Lisa, and she has stress at work. In the first scenario, the doctor prescribes 1 tablet of a sleeping pill a night to help her sleep better. But since she is still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, she decides to take another tablet. This is a conscious decision on her part, a deviation from the prescribed treatment regimen for therapeutic purposes, right? So in other words, an intentional misuse of the medication, an intentional drug misuse, right? So in that case, we're describing a drug misuse. So let's actually take a second and we will pull up the browser and let's see what drug misuse looks like in the browser. So what I did was I basically just typed drug misuse. I'm looking at the LLT level in here and I hit enter on my browser. And as you can see, when a drug misuse pops up, it does pop up showing that it is intentional. So we have 3 options available for drug misuse. So just to kind of, drive the point of it being intentional there. Okay, so now we will move on to a second scenario. So in the second scenario, a friend advises her to look for painkillers on the internet to calm down. She orders the medication and takes 1 tablet a day at first, but then continuously increases the dose to 4 tablets a day by now. So here we also have a conscious decision by Lisa to take these painkillers to calm down. So she deviates from the actual therapeutic indication. And gradually takes too much of them. In this case, this constitutes a product abuse, or here, a drug abuse. So in the third scenario, Lisa does not tolerate the sleeping pill. She's dazed after waking up. The doctor prescribes her a painkiller off-label instead. So here we have a conscious decision by the doctor for therapeutic purposes. And we also know that this is an off-label use for an unapproved indication, right? So off-label use of the product medication. So please note that the 3 criteria which are required for the high-level classification as off-label use are met, but for coding purposes, additional information is needed to finally code the LLT under the PT off-label use. So in this case, off-label use has to be explicitly mentioned in the verbatim or case in order to be able to code the information. So why is that? So off-label use refers to the unapproved use or an approved drug of an approved drug in a specific country, right? So this information is not always available for coders in most instances, right? You're a medical coder, you're looking at the information. You don't have everything available to you. You just have that reported term in front of you that you need to code off, right? So really, coders shouldn't make that decision unless off-label use is specifically reported and stated, right? Related guidance can be found in both the PTC document for measured term selection and the companion document around this. And it's also true for the analysis data as well. You are looking at a term that has been coded, right? But you're looking at the reported term as well as the LLT or the hierarchy even of that term that it was coded to. And in that case, you really don't have additional information available to you either. You're just basically going off the term. And that's why we say only if off-label use is specifically stated, then it should be coded. And finally, and we'll get into more detail around these as well as we go through, I'll be going through different scenarios and examples and stuff. So finally, in the fourth scenario, Lisa suffers from forgetfulness due to the stress she is experiencing at her workplace. She also forgets that she has already taken her medication one day and takes it a second time. This is unintentional, but happens in the context of therapeutic use. So this scenario represents a medication error. I'm just going to pull everything up here in my slides so you can see. Okay, so the following flow chart visualizes the decision-making process. Here are 3 core questions: intentional or unintentional? Was it caused by whom? And in the context of therapeutic use, yes or no? So you can see here the 3 questions. So let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. This may be cited by the healthcare professionals or by the consumers, right? So it was intentional. If this is a conscious decision by the healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. These three criteria are required for the high-level classification of an off-label use. But remember, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT of off-label use, as it should be only selected when, as I mentioned just a minute ago on the other slide, when it is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim. And I will keep driving that point today. So we have to, it has to be specifically mentioned in order to code. So if an intentional deviation from the product information originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, right, we would classify this as intentional product misuse. So if the deviation does not occur within the therapeutic use of the product, the deviation would then be classified as drug abuse or drug addiction, right? So as you can see here, it's not in the therapeutic use. And if an unapproved product use is unintentional or accidental, as we can see here on the far right, this can also be caused by both the HCP or patients and consumers. So if this occurs in the context of therapeutic use of the relevant product, it is classified as a medication or product use error. So you could see here the three questions, and you will have these slides as a reference that you can go back and reference anytime, as well as, you can always go and look on the YouTube, watch this back on the YouTube channel as well to get more information, or if you want to see it again, I should say. So you may now argue that in many cases, it is not clear whether such a deviation was intended or unintended. So here you could see an example for such a scenario. It's reported that the patient took an extra tablet before going to bed. If no further information is available, we do not know what the background was, right? Did the patient misunderstand the doctor's instructions or the package leaflet? This would then represent a medication error. Did the doctor mistakenly give her the wrong schedule with the prescription? This would also represent a medication error. In this instance, a prescribing error. Or is the patient's discomfort getting worse at bedtime, and so she decided to take one more tablet? This scenario would constitute an intentional drug misuse. Or did the doctor decide to use the drug off-label because he was convinced that the treatment would be more effective this way? So our case information does not allow for any of these classifications. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes when no further information can be obtained? We all know, in day-to-day, we send queries, we ask questions. Sometimes we don't get valid responses or responses that contain the information we need, right? So now for coding such scenarios, MedDRA contains some very vague or non-specific PT. So in the case that you do submit that query or you do ask these questions and you cannot get any additional information, we do have these vague terms. So if it is not clear whether such an event happened by mistake or intentionally, LLTs under the PT of product use issue can be used, a very general term. So what I can do here is I can pull up the browser again and just pull up at the PT level. I will pull up what we are discussing. So the PT of product use issue, I'll just type it in and then we can open it. We can go to the browser, right click and go to browser, and we can look at it here and look from a top-down approach, right? So here, product use issue, and we can see there are a variety of different terms that can be used. So obviously you would look to see which vague term would meet your needs the most, which is the closest to the term being reported. So just to give you an example of how to search for that in the browser, if you want to practice and follow along while I'm talking. So, and if it is not clear whether an intentional deviation from the proper product use happens for therapeutic reasons, a suitable LLT under the PT intentional product use can be selected. I will also show you the LLTs under intentional product use issue. So we have it up here because when I did my little search, I just looked that way. I can go to browser and open it up here and see what LLTs may fall under intentional product use issue. So again, very important, even when looking for neutral or vague terms, always be sure to check the browser and make sure you're looking at every LLT that may be available to you so you can match the closest one with your reported term. Very helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my next slide. So the flow chart shown here before must therefore be expanded with these two neutral terms, right? So you can see the question marks here in the intentional, accidental, and then question mark. If it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under the PT intentional product use issues should be assigned. And if it cannot be clarified whether an unapproved product used by HCP or patient consumer occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under the PT product use issues should be assigned. So like we saw in the browser, you can search around and look and see what's available. And here we have a screenshot for you so that you have it as a reference. These two are quite vague terms, but you'll find others as well. So more specific terms in MedDRA for dose or schedule deviations, which are, so to speak, more kind of neutral or vague terms because they do not contain the information accidental or intentional. They can be chosen in combination with other MedDRA terms for intentional misuse, off-label use, or medication errors, and allow us to capture the details of what actually happened when new suitable combination term can be found. So in this screenshot, as mentioned, it's taken from the MedDRA browser as a reference to some of these neutral terms. And as you can see, as I click through, I'm highlighting some of the terms available to use. So you have it as a reference. So just so you have that. Okay, so before I go into a quick little, a little bit more structured browser demo, just to show you a couple things, I'm going to take a quick pause. Are there any questions, Sarah?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna pull up the browser, which we had up. I'm actually gonna clear my search so we can start fresh. We'll put it at the LLT level. So in order to efficiently and effectively search for suitable MedDRA terms for verbatims that relate to unapproved product use, deviations from the approved product information, the label, it is relevant to understand MedDRA structure and rules and the details of the PTC guidance document, right? So as we mentioned, it's also important to make yourself familiar with the MSSO MedDRA browsing tools or your own in-house MedDRA browsers. So now I will show you where to become familiar with these terms. So right now, what I will do is I will go to the HLGT because I know this exists of medication errors. I will pull that up, and what I will do is I will right click and I will go to browser and pull up the medication errors and other product use issues. So you can do it that way, or you can also, you can, instead of going on the right hand side and typing it in and then right clicking and going, you can also start at the SOC injury and poisoning and then just expand it open and see what's available and see here that is available. And then as you can see, there are lots of HLTs available underneath that, as well as if you open up any HLT, you can see the PTs, anything from product dose confusion, and then you can see what LLTs may fall under any individual PT. So even a use of ever-prone abbreviation, if abbreviation is used, we have one LLT under there. We also have an HLGT of off-label uses and intentional product misuses. And again, if you see it falls under the SOC of injury and poisoning. So if we open that up, we can see here that we do have some HLTs of intentional product misuses, intentional product use issues, and off-label uses. And then we also have an HLGT available of overdoses and underdoses, just to show you some examples. So if you are interested in seeing what's available from an overdose perspective and you don't know where to start, you can always come here and start at the HLGT level and then say, okay, I'm interested in overdoses. You can expand that. You can see what PTs are available related to overdose. And in this instance, let's just say an instance of, it's a prescribed overdose. You want to see what's available. You look at the PT level and then you open it up and you can say, okay, there's a medically prescribed, there's a multiple drug overdose prescribed, or there's just plain prescribed overdose. So you can get a feel for kind of what's available in here. And then there's also something else I wanted to show you, and it may not always fall under, say the SOC injury poisoning when you get taken to the browser, you may have to look elsewhere. And in this case, we're going to look under the psychiatric SOC and go to the HLGT of psychiatric disorders, NEC, and we're going to expand that open. And as you can see, there is an HLT here for substance-related and addictive disorders. And we can expand that as well and then see what falls underneath it. Stuff like drug abuse, drug dependence, drug use disorder, etc. And again, this falls under the SOC of psychiatric disorders. And if you are saying, well, how would I know that? How would I know to go to the psychiatric disorders? If you just go here and you're looking for, say you have a case of drug abuse right here, it's on the left-hand side. You don't need to know. You're just looking strictly from a drug abuse perspective. You could just go to the browser, click enter, and then expand it this way if you would like. And you could see here, it falls under the psychiatric. Or you can just say, okay, I want to see what else is available. Go to drug abuse, right click, go to browser, and you can see, okay, there are many other terms available underneath there. And then you could take a look to say, okay, maybe I have a specific type of drug abuse, like a cannabis abuse. And that closer matches my verbatim. So it's two ways you can do it. This is considered top down. This is considered kind of bottom up, where you're starting at the LLT and you're ending at the SOC. Whereas this one, you're starting at the SOC and maybe ending at the LLT, depending on what level you're looking at. And again, if you're from an analysis perspective, you may not need to go as deep as the LLT level. You might just be interested more in the HLT or the HLGT if you're trying to build, say, a customized query or something to that extent to kind of search these terms. Or if you're just, reviewing medical coding and you're looking at it from a PT perspective, you may not need to dive as deep as the LLT. And then there's one more thing I wanted to show you in the browser. It's the MedDRA concept descriptions. I would say from a medication error perspective, which is what we are talking about today, get yourself very familiar with these concept descriptions. So right now, I'm sorry, I am working on two screens. I have to pull this over. When you click on it, it should just pop up on your screen. But for me, because I had two screens, anyway, if you have two screens, it might pop up on the other one like me. Okay, so anyway, for here, you can see that there are concept descriptions for abuse, right? There are also concept descriptions if we go here to M for medication errors or medication monitoring errors. There are also for misuse, and you can get yourself familiar with what these concept descriptions mean and what's in there. Also for off-label use, as we already discussed today, for overdose, as well as for underdose. You can see here, so you could see what they mean. Take a look, definitely familiar yourself with these. As you can see, it's not that extensive of a list. And you can hop around at the top to just see the ones you want to see. So if you're just interested in underdose, go to you, there you go. And you can read through what the actual concept description means for there. And we also, it's important to note, I'm going to take you back up to the top. I'm going to click to D, that there are definitions for dosage here, which is here, and then dose as well. So just to give you an idea of what's in there and what's available for you to reference when needed. So it's a very, very great tool, used often, I would say. Definitely give yourself a chance to go through there and play around. Okay, so this slide basically serves as a screenshot where to find the concept descriptions that we just discussed. So I have a visual reference here for you so you don't have to try to remember on your own. And then this slide is a screenshot that relates to the hierarchy of the relevant terms. So you also have a reference when you begin to look. So what we talked about under injury, under psychiatric, so you don't have to try to remember, or write down everything we said today. You have it available for you. I'm just going to pull up all the information on my slide. So what kind of terms can we find under the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and problems? So we could find PTs for certain types of errors, such as wrong drug, wrong patient, or wrong route. They can be selected together with, for example, the PT prescribing error if no combination term is available. And terms that link to an error to a stage in the medication use process, such as the prescribing stage, as you can see in the second bullet. In the third row, in addition, there are terms for intercepted errors prevented by third-party intervention so that they don't reach the patient. So that's important to note, right? It was an intercepted error and it never reached the patient. So we do have terms available for that as well. A MedDRA also contains two PTs that describe the possibility of an error or a signal, a circumstance that could potentially lead to a medication device use error or medication error. And finally, we also, well, not finally, but we also have the vague PTs that I've already mentioned, which can be used when it is unclear whether the reported incident was due to an error or happened intentionally, or when it is unclear whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient or consumer occurred in the context of therapeutic use. So we do have those vague terms available as well. So now what I would like to do is just take a quick, give you a turn kind of to do a poll. I was going to say take a quick poll, but how would you code dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label? So based on what we've learned so far and what you heard, how would you code this reported incident? And can this be considered an underdose? And remember, you can look up the concept descriptions if you so choose to, that we just saw in the MedDRA browser. Okay, so let's see. Oh, 50-50 right now. Okay, now we're switching it up a little bit. So right now, underdose is taking the lead. Okay, so it looks like lots of people are choosing underdose. But we do have, keeps changing. For incorrect. Oops, sorry, I have a typo here. That's supposed to say incorrect dosage administered. My fault. I'll fix that. Okay, so most of you are voting for underdose, and this is correct. The concept description for underdose was, underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. So what is reported is definitely an underdose. We don't know whether this underdose was taken accidentally or intentionally, and that is why a vague term like the LLT of underdose should be selected. It's not a dosage error, so based on the concept description, the term dosage refers to the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses, a broader term that does not only cover dose deviations, but also administration schedule and duration. And the LLT drug administration error, the one found here that nobody picked, is much too vague. So just to give you a little practice, and we're gonna do one more practice. There we go. So how would you code inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pill? So here, the reported term is a patient inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pills. Okay, let's see, lots of people picking accidental overdose. Okay, 91%. So runaway right now. Although we're getting a little action on the third one there. So let's see, everyone's leaning towards the accidental overdose. So we are told that the excessive dose was taken inadvertently or accidentally, but it's an accidental overdose or an accidental dose increase, right? So do you remember the concept description for overdose? So overdose is actually more than the maximum recommended dose in quantity or concentration, an excessive dose, right? So the correct response is, as 93% of you had said, accidental overdose. So good job, everyone, 93%. That's great. So everyone's paying attention, which is also great, you know, learning a little bit, right? So that's great. So with that being said, we will move on to some general principles for coding of medication errors. But I will take a quick moment to pause to see if there are any questions. Sarah?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, great. So now that we have made ourselves familiar with the classification of medication errors and other type of product use issues, we're going to have a look at some general principles for the coding of medication errors. So first, a short reminder regarding the basic rules to be followed for coding with MedDRA, right? Always like to give a little reminder every now and again. The quality of the reported information and the extraction of relevant information during data entry are a basic requirement for good and meaningful coding. So if the information received is vague or ambiguous or poor quality, which we all know that comes in from time to time. And like I said, you may send a query, you may get nothing back, right? You ask for clarification in that case, well, and then you may have to, like we mentioned, put it to kind of a vague term. So coding is done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately, most specifically reflects the reported term and events should always be selected. So I mentioned this several times already. It's very, very important concept. Whatever, when you're coding, it's done out of context, right? And everybody, regardless, you could be in pharma, CRO, we have people, a very diverse audience today. You could be in clinical, you could be in safety. Everyone may have a different rule around how they want things coded as well. So it's always important to, number one, check your coding conventions and your internal conventions, and then also take the reported term for what it is, the reported term, and match it to the closest LLT that you can find within the MedDRA dictionary. And as shown, I showed you how you can do a couple of different ways to look in the browser to make sure you're not missing anything when it comes to coding to that closest LLT. So nothing should ever be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should ever be omitted. This is a basic rule. As I mentioned, code as reported. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding. We discussed that we go into that in other webinars. So I assume you are all very familiar with these basic rules, so I won't go into them any further. It's just always good to have a reminder, right? So here are some tips for coding medication errors. So for coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. One item of importance is to become familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions, as I mentioned. You should also have good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. So if you are new to MedDRA and you don't really have an understanding of the hierarchy and what's included in it, I do recommend you could take a webinar, or now we're even having much more face-to-face classes available that you can get a basic understanding of the structure and scope of MedDRA. Once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement of the selected LLT PT accurately reflects the reported event. So it's best to search the MedDRA hierarchy, like I showed you, top down, starting at the SOC, going to the LLT when coding medication errors and other product use concepts. Unless you are very experienced in coding, right? And then you can kind of type in, you can do different things, but also the way you get experience with coding is practicing and trying out these different search techniques. And then eventually it will become secondhand, and you will just go into the browser and know what you have to do and kind of search for these terms. And obviously the dictionary is so large, we don't know, even myself, I don't know every single term available. So it's always best to make sure that you search around and see what's in there. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for medicines, vaccines, or medical devices, look out for a product term that would be suitable for your coding task. I'm just going to click all my information up first. Okay, so the companion document, as we mentioned earlier, specifies some principles for coding medication and other product use errors that you can see on this slide. So it details when to use the PT medication error, when to select more than one term, when to use the PT off-label use, how to capture potential and intercepted medication errors, how to capture both the specific type of error and the stage of the medication use system where the error occurred, when to capture the root cause for medication errors, and that we should not infer a medication error. And I am actually going to address these one by one now as we go through this presentation. So the first principle refers to the use of the PT medication error. So as medical coders, we should not use this term unless we have no further information reported in the case. If you do have further information, then search the hierarchy under the HLT, GT, medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and select the most specific LLT that you can find. If a specific error is reported, but you cannot find any suitable term, then please submit a change request to get a better term and assign an LLT that is the closest match to reported term. And this can then serve as a placeholder. So again, if you're not familiar with the change request process, we do have that available. Every organization gets 100 a month. And we do have webinars that we can go through and help you figure out how to submit a change request. We have recorded webinars, as well as we do it in some of our we go through the process in our live webinars as well. So if you're not familiar with that, please look into a little more training and we can get you familiar with that so that in case you do come across something that's not available, you will then know how to be able to submit it, depending on your organization's rules as well around submitting change requests. So here is an example. If it is only reported that a patient inadvertently didn't use the medication as prescribed and no further information is available, then of course, medication error can be selected. And then you can see here, it goes to the PT of medication error. So sometimes you will get a report of a chain of events where an initial error leads to additional subsequent errors or even adverse events in the patient, right? So initial error, very important, can sometimes lead to consequent errors, right? So then the initial error should be coded as the priority as shown here. And then all subsequent errors and adverse events have to be coded in addition as they are reported. But please, as mentioned, you can see here with the exclamation point to keep as a reminder, but please do not use multiple LLTs to represent one singular incident that is reported with both a general and specific description in the reported term. So this is in line with the general rule for coding of combination terms that refer to a general medical disorder that is further specified. So as an example, if arrhythmia, say, is reported that is specified as an AFib, in the given verbatim, one would only code the more specific type of arrhythmia, which is the atrial fibrillation. So the same kind of concept can be applied to the medication errors. Okay, so again, an example for this principle, it is reported that a nurse miscalculated the dose and the patient received 40 milligrams instead of 20 milligrams of his medication. He experienced severe hypotension. We would capture the initial error, which was the dose calculation error, right? PT, as you can see here, the PT is the same. Then the subsequent administration error with the LLT incorrect dose administered would also be captured, right? And then the resulting adverse event in the patient, the hypotension, would have to be captured. So it's a chain of events starting with the dose calculation error that led to an administration of an incorrect dose, and then finally to an adverse reaction in the patient, a hypotension. So as you can see here, all three. And what we mean by split coding is, I know some of you, I saw we have some clinical folks. If you need anything to be split, obviously you're gonna have to send a query to have this split. And in this case, this may come in post-marketing, and there may be way, depending on your organization, the system you use, etc., there may be ways that you can split this. But to get it split and code it to all three LLTs so that you can capture everything is important. Okay, so now we will move on to off-label use. So as we mentioned a couple times, actually, I mentioned already about the off-label use, but always consider the criteria and information required to select a term under the PT off-label use. So off-label use relates to situations where a HCP intentionally prescribes, dispenses, or recommends a product for a medical purpose, not in accordance with the authorized product information. It has to be HCP, and it has to be intentional and for a medical purpose in the context of therapeutic use. So these are the criteria that must be met for the high-level classification. So as you can see in my slide, the highlighted sentence added in the PTC release 4.23 is copied from the points to consider companion document release 2.0. So as a coder, off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim. So coders should not take this decision when only 3 criteria are met because it needs more specific product knowledge and information about the country of origin and of the reported case, right? So as we mentioned earlier, local regulations and product information may differ between regulatory regions. So coders shouldn't just take that decision. It needs to specifically state that because of the local regulations and how they may differ in different regulatory regions. So regulators are very clear on this, and you'll see that in all examples of off-label use in the PTC document. Off-label use is clearly named in the wording in those documents. So now we're gonna look at an example. It's reported that a pediatrician decided to use COVID-19 vaccine off-label for his 10-year-old high-risk patient, although not yet approved for this age group. So what we can ask ourselves when we first see this term is, does the verbatim fulfill the criteria for classification as off-label use? Is it off-label use explicitly mentioned? So an HCP has caused the deviation. It was his pediatrician. He did it intentionally. He decided to do so, right? So based on the therapeutic considerations, he wanted to protect his 10-year-old patient from an infection. And we are told that he decided to use the COVID-19 vaccine off-label, meaning that the vaccine is not approved for prophylaxis of COVID-19 in the respective country. It is approved, I should say, for prophylaxis of COVID-19 in the respective country, but not for this age group. So the most specific LLT for this scenario, as you can see here, is off-label use in unapproved age group under the PT of off-label use. So you can go into the browser as well as I'm going through these examples, and you can, you can type in off-label use in unapproved age group and right-click on it and go to browser and see what other terms are also available in there to get yourself familiar if you desire to do so. Okay, so now we will move on to potential medication errors, right? So principle 4. So such incidents should also be captured, and MedDRA has 2 PTs for doing so. We have an LLT and PT of circumstance or information capable of leading to a medication error, and we have an LLT and PT of circumstance or information capable of leading to a device use error. MedDRA terms that help capturing the contributing factors should also be selected, like for instance, drug label lookalike, right? So why do some regulators want to receive this information? Are actually very keen to receive, and why are they very keen to receive such information? Well, in such scenarios, no medication error happened yet, but of course, it could occur in the near future based on the reported contributing factors like drug name confusion, etc. So when understanding the background for these potential errors, regulators can then take steps to prevent errors before they are happening, right, as you can see here. So depending on your local requirements, do not omit such information, but capture all the relevant information when receiving similar verbatims and code both the potential for an error by selecting one of these PTs, and then also code the contributing factor or even factors. So just a little reminder there on the bottom. So here again is an example for this principle. A pharmacist reported that the blurred print on the drug label could lead to the wrong dose being given. No medication error occurred yet, but the pharmacist saw a circumstance, the blurred print on the label, that could lead to errors in the future, right? So what you want to remember is that we would code the potential error by selecting circumstance or information capable of leading to a medication error. And we would also code the scenario, the root cause that could lead to a medication error. Here, the blurred print on the label by selecting product label text eligible under the PT of product label issue. So please be aware that we would not code the type of potential medication error in addition by assigning the wrong dose. That would convey that a medication error actually happened. And here, only the potential for a medication error is reported together with the root cause. Okay, so the next principle, sometimes medication errors at an earlier stage of the medication use process are prevented from reaching the patient. So medication error occurred during prescription, maybe during preparation of the medication, etc., but it's detected and intercepted by an active intervention of an additional person. So when such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error should represent the stage where the error actually occurred, not where it was prevented, right? So that's important. I have it highlighted here so you have a reference to it. Prevent it from reaching the patient, and the intercepted error term should reflect the stage at which the error occurred rather than the stage. So meaning that when it's reported that a pharmacist, I'm just going to pull up all my slide stuff, dispensed the wrong drug, but the nurse identified the error before giving it to the patient, we should select the LLT intercepted drug dispensing error under the PT intercepted product dispensing error, capturing the stage where the error actually occurred. We would not code to the LLT intercepted administration error because the nurse did nothing wrong, right? The error occurred at the dispensing stage and not it was never administered. So it was caught beforehand. Okay, so we already talked about the stages of the medication use system when looking into the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and the MedDRA hierarchy. And so the slide shows the different stages, starting with the storage of the medication, continuing with the prescribing stage, the transcribing stage, the preparation and dispensing stage, the administration stage, and finally the monitoring stage. So lots of different stages here, lots of stuff to remember. So one of the principal MedDRA coding rules, code as specifically as possible, capturing the full information of what has been reported, also applies to the coding of medication errors, meaning that if a specific error is reported that occurred at a specific stage in the medication use process, we should capture the full information. So the type of error and the stage where it occurred. So MedDRA contains many terms that capture both the type of error and stage, like for instance, wrong drug prescribed. Other LLTs only capture the type of error like LLT wrong drug or LLT wrong dose. So if the stage where this error occurred is unknown, you can just select the LLTs for the type of error. And others capture the stage only like LLT drug prescribing error or LLT drug dispensing error. So again, if the error is not specified, you would just select an LLT to capture the stage where the error occurred. So always capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. And if the stage is not known, just capture the type of error. So there you go. We have it there on the slide, so you don't have to try to remember that mouthful of stuff I just said. It is a lot, and I know there are lots of stages and a lot, but you do have these slides to back reference, so you don't have to try to memorize. But capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. And if it's not known, use the terms for the type of error only. Okay, so when both the stage and the type of error are reported, you will look for a combination term in MedDRA and use a single LLT to capture the full information when possible. So this can be seen in the first example. So when it's reported that the pharmacy dispensed the wrong drug, the LLT wrong drug dispensed would capture the full information. There is no need to assign two codes like wrong drug and this drug dispensing error. Sometimes, though, you may not find a suitable combination term. So if it is reported that a doctor mistakenly prescribed the wrong strength, you would have to split it. By split, I mean query to split, like I mentioned, or in drug safety, you may have the ability to split it by saying add in parentheses to the term and, you know, just to add the additional information and then being able to code the term to two LLTs. To capture the reported information and in full by assigning the LLT wrong strength and the LLT drug prescribing error to the individual terms. Okay, so we briefly addressed the root causes when talking about potential medication errors. If a medication error is reported in conjunction with the actual cause of this error, then always select a term for the root cause plus the resulting error. Remember what we discussed earlier, right? Root causes are critical to understand why an error occurred and to identify interventions that can be undertaken to prevent that error in the future. And that is why regulators are very interested in obtaining information about these root causes. So just to give you information around the root cause. Okay, so the next example describes such a case. So a doctor wrote a prescription for 40 milligrams of drug X for angina every 6 hours. But because of the illegibility of the prescription, and you could see here, it's very hard to read, right? The nurse administered the same dose of drug Y, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension, for which the maximum daily dose is only 10 milligrams. So because of the error made, the patient received 160 milligrams of this calcium channel blocker per day, 4 times or 40 milligrams. And a day after taking the first 4 overdoses of the calcium channel blocker, the patient suffered a heart attack and died. So what actually needs to be captured here? So at first, the underlying disease and indication for use, which would be the angina, right? Then the illegible written prescription. As you can see here, we have the LLT written prescription illegible to capture that. Next, even the resulting medication errors or the administration of the wrong drug and the accidental overdose. And then finally, all of this, like we said earlier, it's a series or a chain of events happening. They led to a heart attack, which then should be captured. The resulting adverse reaction in the patient, the heart attack. So remember, it's very important to capture the root cause if reported. And there we go, the root cause. Okay, so this slide shows the last principle that we will discuss today. So do not infer a medication error, which we talked about earlier, right? Remember another basic rule for coding with MedDRA. Code as reported, as we stated several times. Do not add or subtract relevant medical information. So this same rule that we use for day-to-day medical coding of everyday reported events also applies to the coding of medication errors. If you receive a verbatim term that describes a deviation from the label, and unauthorized use of a product, only select the LLT or LLTs that reflect what has been reported. Do not assume that a medication or device use error occurred if this is not made clear in the verbatim. So it's the same like you do every day if you are a medical coder on the line. And the same thing you would do day to day when you get a reported term like we talked about comes in. We're not going to infer, we're not going to take away information, we're going to just use that reported term. And the same is true whether you're a physician analyzing the data, a safety scientist, whatever the case may be. When you're looking at that term, we have to go by what's in that term, not by what we believe will happen or did happen or could happen. So we have to that's very, very important concept. I would say in medical coding life, it's one of the most important on a day-to-day basis, whether it be with medication errors or just coding in general. And it's important to also get other people to understand that concept as well. And here it is, more information on it about not inferring. Because if you understand, but then say someone's looking at the data and they don't understand, then it could cause a conflict in how it should be coded or why. When, basically if everyone's on the same page, then you all understand that nothing should be inferred. So if it is reported that a nurse administered 50 milligrams of drug X, do not assume that this is a medication error, right? Try to obtain more information from the reporter or find out the dose range referencing the prescribing information of the respective drug. And again, a query may have to be sent. We don't always know what the ranges are. Okay, so as a summary, here is a nice visual presentation of the different types of medication error cases that were taken from the Good Practice Guide of the EMA, as we saw earlier. So in the first example, a medication error occurs leading to an administration error and to harm in the patient. Next, an error happens and reaches the patient, but it does not result in any harm to the patient. The third type of report refers to an intercepted medication error, where an error occurs in the medication use process, but is prevented from reaching the patient or the consumer. So here you see intercepted error. And finally, a potential error is described where it is reported that there is a risk for a medication error in the product use process due to special circumstances, a special root cause like drug name confusion or drug packaging confusion or drug appearance confusion. So as you can see here, a potential error. And again, there's a link to the document down below. So you will have that in your slide that you can reference and then link to the document and read it if you choose to. Okay, so before we move on to the next section, I will just take a brief pause to see if there are any questions.
Nope, not at this time.
Oh, great. Hopefully everyone's following along nicely. I'm not confusing everyone. No, but it's good. We'll keep going, which is great. So in the last part of this webinar, we will work together on 5 examples to apply the previously introduced decision chart and the general principles for coding medication errors and other product use concepts. So we will get now more into the hands-on, do a little, use the pull everywhere a little bit more, which is always fun. See what we can come up with. Okay, I like to just pull up all my information before I start. So at first, this is just a general slide for assessing the reported information. So at first we will have to assess the reported information when dealing with medication error type terms, right? These are some questions you can ask yourself. So first check for the 3 criteria for classification, right? Did the incident occur intentionally or unintentionally? Who caused it? Was there a therapeutic purpose? Then check at what stage the error occurred, right? Where did it occur? And whether it led to subsequent errors and even harm in the patient. And if contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or was the report referring to circumstances that could lead to a medication error, a potential medication error? Or was the error intercepted before reaching the patient? So because the type of report, the type of information that you will get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms. It will help you find the most suitable LLTs or the closest matches. Right, and we have a little reminder there for you. So here is our first demonstration to consider. So it is reported that the nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. What can we take from this report? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally, right? The nurse forgot. So do we know who caused it? Yes, HCP, a nurse, right, in this case. And was it in the framework of the therapeutic use of the product? I'd say, yeah, it was, right? We also know the stage where the error occurred, but no root cause was provided. So we have all those checked except the last one. And with that being said, how would you code nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient? Let's see what we get here. Okay, 67% are saying drug dose omission and error. And okay, temporary interruption of therapy. Okay, I'll give you a couple seconds to check your browser. I'm going to keep this open. I will come back to this. I'm going to go through while you are all searching. I'm going to go through some information. I just want to show you a decision chart that you can go by when you are deciding how to code these terms. So we know that the incident was caused by an error, right? So it's accidental. We know that it was caused by the nurse, right? An HCP. And we know that it occurred in the framework of therapeutic use. Yes. So the incident has to be classified as a medication error. So now, with that being said, while you are browsing, what I would recommend to search is maybe go to, like we saw earlier, the SOC injury and the HLGT of medication errors. It was an administration error, so you might want to look into the HLT product administration errors and issues, etc. So while just a couple tips that you can, recommendations that you can use while browsing to see what type of term you will use. I'll give everyone a couple more minutes. I'm actually going to go back to the poll and see where we're at here with some responses. Okay, so it looks like a majority here, 84% are saying drug dose omission and error. Okay, and it looks like the poll has become a little stagnant. Sorry, I have to now scroll through these. But here is this slide serves as a visual of representation of our choices, right? The choices that we had. So with that being said, LLTs under the PT inappropriate schedule of product administration would be selected when it is reported that the dose omissions occur regularly or take place more often, like when a patient takes a once daily dose less frequently, right? And the LLT drug use for an unapproved schedule is grouped under the PT product use issue, a PT that is much too vague for the reported scenario. So the PT therapy interruption, which can be found in the SOC of surgical and medical procedures if you were looking around in your browser, LLTs under this PT should only be used when a therapy was interrupted due to reasons that are out of control of the HCP or patient consumer, like supply or insurance or financial issues, etc., like product availability issues, for instance, when a patient cannot afford the medication. So with that being said, the correct term selection is a drug dose omission and error. Very well done, which most of you have chosen. So well done. Okay, so we will move on to our next example. Here it is reported that a patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So what do we know based on the information provided, right? Was it accidental or intentional? Yes. Do we know who caused it? We do. Was it in the framework of therapeutic use? Yes, it was. And we also know the stage where it occurred, right? But no root cause was provided again. So we know that the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly, but we don't know why. Whether it was stressed, distracted, maybe they just didn't feel like reading it. You know, who knows? We do not know. So with that being said, how would you code patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication? So I would say some tips for browsing in here is maybe look for a combination term, maybe type in the search in the browser of indication, maybe admin, just a shortened version, ADMIN, and see if you find anything. Also, you can maybe search for indication and use and see what you find. Those are my recommendations of how I would search in the browser, you know, just to get the searching started. Okay. Right now, it looks like 89% are saying unintentional use for unapproved indication. We have a couple responses for drug use for unapproved indication and product leaflet instructions confusion. Okay, so with that being said, I will come back to this poll just to see if anything changes, but we will move on to see the decision making. So let's use our decision chart again. And these are things that you can incorporate into your day-to-day when you know you're coding these types of terms. I know you're not going to probably pull up a slide and go through it like this, but these are just questions you can ask yourself on a regular basis, you know. So we know that the incident happened accidentally, right? We know that it was caused by the patient in this case. And we know that it was in the context of therapeutic use, right? So meaning the verb that this verbatim describes a medication error. So with that being said, hopefully you are searching to look for a type of term that encompasses that. And I'm just going to take a quick peek back at the poll and see if anything, it looks like 92% of you are still sticking with unintentional use for unapproved indication. So here is just again, a visual representation of the terms that we were looking at in the poll. And I will go through them. So like I said, it's important to kind of look for different types of terms. And if you did look, you may have found the LLT unintentional use for unapproved indication, capturing the accidental nature of the incident. Plus maybe you saw the LLT drug use for unapproved indication, which is more vague. Both may be suitable, right? But we do not capture the fact that the drug was actually finally administered with this code assignment. It would be necessary to split the coding to capture the full information and to select drug administration error in addition. With this LLT, we capture the accidental nature of the incident, and that is why both the LLT is unintentional use for unapproved indication and drug use for unapproved indication can be used to capture the details of the administration error that the drug was taken for the wrong indication. And the LLT off-label use in unapproved indications would be incorrect, which not a lot of people picked anyway, because the verbatim does not describe an off-label use. And finally, the product leaflet instruction confusion, which again, not many people chose, was terms that do not reflect, it's a term that does not reflect what has been reported. The patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly, and it was not reported that the instructions themselves were confusion. So it's also important to kind of keep that information in mind as you go through this. So in this case, we say drug administration error, so the final suggestions, and unintentional use for unapproved indication. So again, the drug use for unapproved indication does not capture the full information, and therefore splitting requires for this scenario. So the PTC companion document, once again, very important to read, clearly states that coding a singular error by selecting two error terms is useful when this provides meaningful additional information. In other words, when the single LLT cannot describe the entire reported scenario. So alternately, one could also assign the LLT unintentional use for unapproved indication, capturing the accidental nature. But this is already captured by the LLT drug administration error. And that is why, in my view, both solutions are acceptable. And personally, I would prefer the LLT drug use for unapproved indication because it captures the fact that a drug was used for an unapproved indication in this case. Okay, so now we're going to move on to demonstration 3, to example 3, I should say. A patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Let's look at the verbatim and answer the relevant questions as we always do, right? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes. We know that the patient consciously decided to take more than the recommended dose to get a better drug effect. Do we know what caused it? Yes, it was a decision of the patient in this case, right? Was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes. We also know the stage where the error occurred, but no root cause, again, was provided. So with that being said, how would you code patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect? We have unapproved dose administered, intentional overdose, intentional misuse by dose change, incorrect dosage administered, wrong dose, etc. So let's see what you would do. In this case, I would recommend maybe you look in the SOs in the stock of injury and go to HLGT off-label uses and intentional product misuse issues, or the HLT intentional product misuses, right? Find the PTs, look at all the LLTs around it, and see what you can come up with. I'll give everyone a couple of seconds to make their decision. Okay, so it looks like in this one we are a little more split here. We have, it's going up now for intentional overdose, intentional misuse by dose change. Okay, and remember, you can always check your concept descriptions in the browser as well to see what those are saying, to see the definition or the concept description themselves and what it refers to, I should say. Okay, so it looks like 61, we're kind of split, and 0 on the rest. Very interesting, so just split between the two. Okay, so let's go into the decision-making portion. So again, was this intentional or accidental? So in this case, it was intentional. Was it caused, who was it caused by? So in this case, we know it was caused by the patient. And then we know that it was for a therapeutic purpose, yes. So meaning that this verbatim describes an intentional drug misuse, product misuse, or drug misuse. Okay, so as I mentioned, when browsing, I gave you a couple ways that you can kind of go in and look. But in this case, we do know that it was a conscious decision by the patient, an intentional deviation from the prescription for therapeutic reasons. So an option we had was the PT intentional overdose. So you will find it in the HLGT overdoses and underdoses under the HLT intentional overdoses. But the verbatim alone does not allow for classification as an intentional overdose. More information about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed to do so, right, in that case. So all other options that were offered in this poll were incorrect. So the LLT's unapproved dose administered, incorrect dose administered, and incorrect dosage administered do not represent intentional drug misuse, but drug administration errors or use issues. And I saw, if I remember correctly, back at the poll, there were lots of zeros on some of those terms. So again, here's a screenshot of the Measure browser showing the LLTs from the poll. So the LLT unapproved dose administered, it's grouped under product use issue. And actually, just as a side note, we got several change requests to move this LLT, but the placement here is correct. The use of an unapproved dose is not necessarily incorrect when it occurs in the context of off-label, right? It's open to multiple circumstances, so unintentional or intentional misuse, off-label use, etc. So the current placement is appropriate. So just as a little side note to keep in mind. So the LLT incorrect dosage administered represents a dosage administration issue or error, not an intentional misuse. Similarly, the LLT, wrong dose administered, does not an intentional misuse concept, right? It is grouped under the PT incorrect dose administered and represents a dose administration issue or error. So you can refer to page 24 of the companion document example with once daily dose taken more frequently if needed. So remember the difference between dose and dosage that I showed you way back, it seems like a week ago, earlier in the presentation, when reviewing some of MedDRA concept descriptions. You could have looked that up, right? You could say the dose refers to the quantity to be administered at one time, such as a specified amount of medication, or the dosage to the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses, meaning that the dosage is a much broader term. And as I already mentioned, that the coding to the LLT intentional overdose would be inappropriate because more info about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed to make that determination. So with that being said, the final answer for the coding of the verbatim is intentional misuse by dose change. So very good for everyone who selected that. And it falls under the PT of intentional product misuse. Okay, we have 2 more examples we're going to go through. Number 4 would be the doctor prescribed drug A off-label for suppression of preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. So again, we have to ask ourselves the same questions. Everyone's going to be so sick of these questions, but they do help, and they are really good to ask yourself when you're going through the process. So do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we do. Do we know who caused it? Yes, we do. Right? It was HCP. Was it in the framework of the therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. All criteria for classification of the incident as off-label use are met. And it is also reported that the doctor used the drug off-label, meaning that we can code to a suitable term under the PT of off-label, right? Gave you a little hint there. We also know that the stage where the issue occurred, yes. So at the stage of prescribing, the drug was prescribed off-label for a patient suffering preterm labor. But again, no root cause. So with that being said, how would you code this term? The doctor prescribed drug A off-label for suppression of preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. I'll give everyone a minute or so to go through and think. And again, I gave a little hint. I would definitely recommend searching for off-label and explore all the LLTs that may fall underneath it. Okay, it looks like, oh, whoops, whoopsies. Sorry about that. Okay, it looks like we're having a runaway here. Well, 3/4 of you are choosing off-label use and unapproved indication, okay? We are getting a lot of agreement on the line today. I like this because we have lots of different people from lots of different regions of the world and also lots of different roles from when we took our beginning polls. And to have everyone agree is very good. This is great. I like to see this. So we have a couple, and the intentional use for unlabeled indication and drug prescribed for unapproved indication. Okay, so it looks like right now we are off-label use and unapproved indication. So let's go through and do our tree. So let's use our decision chart for this scenario now. So we know it was a conscious decision, so it was intentional, right? We also know that the decision was made by an HCP, here the doctor. And we know that it was made for a therapeutic purpose. So this incident can be classified as off-label use based on our 3 criteria, and because we are also provided with the information that the doctor prescribed the drug off-label, right? So very important, like we mentioned many, many times before, specifically states that it was provided off-label in the term. Okay, so here is just a screenshot of our terms. So the LLT, drug use for unapproved indication, it's too vague. It does not capture the off-label use, right? Drug prescribing error is incorrect because we know that this was a conscious decision of the physician, and drug prescribed for unapproved indication is, again, it's very vague when looking at the PT name, right? The LLT intentionally used for unlabeled indication is grouped under the intentional product use issue, and it doesn't represent an off-label use. This LLT could be used, for example, when a patient intentionally decides to take a drug for an unlabeled indication without knowing whether this was for therapeutic purposes. So in this case, the best match for the reported scenario is the LLT off-label use and unapproved indication, which approximately 75% of you chose. So very good job. As it captures everything we need, and we would only split code if no LLT is available, which covers the details of the off-label use. So here you go. Here's the slide just to remind you of what the correct answer was. And of course, it's important to note that the preterm labor would also be coded in this case, or it could be coded depending on, your internal decisions. Okay, we have our final example of the day. The doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So again, we will go through and we will say, do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we do know. Do we know who caused it or made the decision? We do. Was it in the context of therapeutic use of the product? It was. And we also know the stage where the error occurred, right? So I'm not giving you too many hints this time. because it is our last one. And was there a root cause that has to be captured? That should be captured, I should say. Yes, there was. So with that being said, how would you code the doctor mixed up drug names because they look similar and the wrong medication was prescribed? I'll give everyone a couple seconds. I would, again, one hint, you could search the browser for wrong drug, but it looks like a lot of you are already. Our hint for browsing is you can go to the HLT product confusion errors and issues and kind of open it up and see what PTs and LLTs may fall underneath that. Okay, it looks like 81% of you are choosing wrong drug prescribed. A couple people drug use, drug name lookalike, very good, 9%. Product confusion, okay, it looks like we're getting a little stagnant, so we will move on to our decision tree. So our decision making. So we know that this occurred unintentionally, right, or accidentally. We also know that it was caused by the doctor. And we know that this happened in the framework of therapeutic use, yes. So meaning that this incident represents a medication error. So again, everybody browsed, we got our answers. Here is a slide just to represent again what we went through. So as we go through the LLT wrong drug, it's too vague and could relate to all different stages in the medication use process. So here it was reported the wrong drug was prescribed. LLT wrong drug administered would assume that this error reached the patient. This was not reported. The error may have been prevented from reaching the patient. We don't know this, right? We don't have that information. The LLT product confusion would again be too vague. A better, more specific term is available. That is drug name lookalike, which fully captures the root cause in this case. So that's important to note. Drug name lookalike captures the root cause. And then wrong drug prescribed is the correct LLT to be selected. Also, LLT drug prescription issue is too vague because we know that the wrong drug was prescribed in error. So here we go. The correct answer, wrong drug prescribed, to capture the prescribing error under the product PT of product prescribing error. And then we can also code and capture drug name lookalike as the root cause with product name confusion. So with that being said, we have come to the end of the webinar, and we are now approaching the end of this presentation. We went through some examples. First we looked into the regulatory background for the topic of medication errors, I introduced helpful ICH guidance documents for coding of medication errors and other product use issues, which again, I highly recommend. Just take a little time, especially read through the companion document. It is very, very helpful. The amount of time you spend reading it will be kind of given back to you in the amount of information you'll gain out of it and then the time you will save in the long run when dealing with these types of terms. So if you look at it that perspective, you know, it's not that bad of a task then if you kind of put it in that perspective. We discussed related definitions and looked into some related concept descriptions. We discussed the general principles for coding of medication errors, and we applied them with some examples. So the MSSO regularly receives data dumps from the EMA that reflect the measure terms which were used for coding the reported cases in the EudraVigilance database. We have looked for the most commonly used PTs under the HLT GT of medication errors and other product use errors and issues. And amongst them, we already found 3 quite vague terms like product use and unapproved indication, product dose omission issue, and product use issue. So 2 others include the information error, but are again quite broad or quite vague. So the PT medication error and product administration error. So only the PT accidental overdose is more specific. So if you are responsible for coding medication error reports, please make sure to code the reported incidents as specifically as possible. Make yourself familiar with the granularity of MedDRA in this area and refer to the concept descriptions, the PTC guidance documents, the companion document, and try to capture all the reported details. Only then regulators and also pharma companies will have the chance to run useful analysis in their databases to get new insights into the extent and causes of medication errors, and to develop improved strategies for their prevention, right, which is always important. I know that this seems like overwhelming maybe. We went through tons of information, but like I said, you can always back reference these slides. You can listen to this again on our YouTube channel. You can take other courses if you're not as familiar with, say, the structure and scope of MedDRA or other areas of MedDRA that you would like to gain more knowledge on. So with that being said, I have some contact sites for you that you can reference. We have our website that I went to today to show you where to find the documents, our browsers, also our change request submission. And again, if you need more information on that, please be sure to check our training schedule where you can maybe take a class to help you with the change requests. So with that being said, I would like to thank you all. But before I do so, I just want to take a brief pause to see if any questions have come in before we wrap up today.
We do not.
Okay, great. So I hope with that being said, I want to thank everyone for taking almost 2 hours out of your very, very busy days and joining me today. I hope everyone at least has one important takeaway from today's class. I am looking forward to seeing everyone hopefully at an in-person event soon, or maybe we'll cross paths again virtually at another webinar. I want to thank you again. I want to wish you a great rest of your day. And I also would like to say you will be getting an opportunity to provide feedback on this webinar. I usually do a feedback slide and I forgot to add it in today, a poll. So I would appreciate it greatly if you can provide some feedback when that comes through. It'll probably take maybe 2 minutes to fill out, and it would be helpful to see what everyone thought of today's webinar, and hopefully you all learned something. And with that being said, have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much again, and I hope to see you soon.